Did Oberyn Martell poison Tywin Lannister? Would Tywin have died anyway, even if Tyrion hadn't shot him? Did the Martells actually get the vengeance they desired on House Lannister? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. On this channel we cover A Song of Ice and Fire in nerdy detail, as well as The Lord of the Rings, The Witcher and more. Welcome. So, did Oberyn Martell poison Tywin? Well, let's start with the obvious question of why many people think that Tywin had already been poisoned when Tyrion shot him with that crossbow. Because that's the idea we are working with here. Tyrion may have killed Tywin, but it didn't actually make any difference. Tywin would have died anyway in a few days. And with apologies if you've just had your dinner, our first clue comes with where Tyrion found Tywin. He was on the privy, apparently struggling to relieve himself. He had been sat there for some time, it seems, at least long enough time for Tyrion to creep into his bedchamber, talk to Shae, strangle her to death, hunt for a weapon, load a crossbow, then make his own way to the privy. And when Tyrion finally shot Tywin, we're told that Tywin's bowels opened and there was a sudden stench, a stink that filled the room. Fair enough, you might think. Human bodies can do that when life ends. But it shows that although Tywin had been sat there a while, his bowels were still full, so there was definitely at least some kind of constipation going on, and the toxic smell is mentioned a couple of times. Later, after Tywin's body had been embalmed and placed on display in the Great Sept, it gets even more grim. We read this. The king's hand was rotting visibly. His face had taken on a greenish tinge, and his eyes were deeply sunken, 2 black pits. Fissures had opened in his cheeks, and a foul white fluid was seeping through the joints of his splendid gold and crimson armour to pool beneath his body. The Septons were the first to see when they returned for their dawn devotions. They sang their songs and prayed their prayers and wrinkled up their noses, and one of the most devout grew so faint that he had to be helped from the sept. That doesn't sound like a normal corpse. There's something very wrong with it. The Septons are professionals at dealing with dead bodies, and one of them had to be helped from the room, so great was the smell. Tommen, later, was physically sick from it. It certainly seems as if there was something toxic at work on that body. And as it happens, we're told a few chapters earlier about a poison that would do exactly what we see happen to Tywin. Widow's blood. Grand Maester Pycelle mentions it during Tyrion's trial for Joffrey's murder, which is completely unrelated to this murder, in case you were wondering. I did a separate video on that. Widow's blood, this one is called, he said, for the colour. A cruel potion. It shuts down a man's bladder and bowels until he drowns in his own poisons. So we have a poison that shuts down someone's bladder and bowels until they drown in their own internal toxins. And Tywin, whose bladder and bowels clearly stopped working properly, and whose body after death seemed to be consumed by its own toxins. Oh, and that bottle of widow's blood that Pycelle talked about, it was stolen mysteriously from Pycelle's stores. Yes, the notion that Tywin was poisoned seems pretty strong, but why blame Oberyn? There were a lot of people who might want Tywin dead. Well, we should probably start by being clear that Oberyn really wanted Tywin dead. In fact, that was the reason he was there in King's Landing in the first place. To understand why, let's go back to before all the upheaval and devastation of Robert's rebellion. Prince Rhaegar was married to Elia Martell, Oberyn's sister, and they had 2 small children, Rhaenys and Aegon. During the sack of King's Landing, at the end of the rebellion, Elia was murdered, as were her 2 children, and not just killed, it was brutal, horrible, and it was clear who was to blame: the Lannisters. In particular, the Mountain, who we obviously know, and Sir Amory Lorch, who we meet briefly at Harrenhal in the books, and the order to do it came direct from Tywin Lannister himself. Elia wasn't just a random member of House Martell. We're told that Oberyn and she were very close, so close that when she was killed, Oberyn tried to raise an army to take on the Lannisters in retribution before Doran managed to persuade him that that was folly, and persuaded him to embrace a longer-term plan. Vengeance wasn't set aside, just postponed. And so, for a decade and more, the Martells held their fire and plotted. They secretly supported the restoration of the Targaryen monarchy because once the Targaryens were back, the Lannisters would be easier prey. Arianne, Doran's daughter, was secretly betrothed to Viserys, the king in exile. But then that plan fell through. Viserys died. Drogo poured molten gold over his head. Doran tried to patch things up, sending Quentyn to Meereen to try to secure a marriage to Daenerys, but he could no longer reasonably hold back Oberyn from seeking revenge, particularly as the Lannisters were now very much in control. Any pretense that this was a Baratheon monarchy was now gone. Their opportunity actually came quite quickly. Tyrion, as acting hand of the king at the time, invited Doran to come to King's Landing and be a part of new King Joffrey's small council. Tyrion had his reasons, of course. At the time, the Baratheon Lannister reign was faced with what seemed to be an existential threat from Renly Baratheon in alliance with the Tyrells. Tyrion knew that the Lannisters needed allies, hence him trying to get Doran on side. Tyrion knew enough of the history between the Martells and the Lannisters to understand that he would have to make the offer to come to King's Landing a good one, so as well as a seat on the small council, he offered Myrcella Lannister's hand in marriage to Trystane Martell, and crucially, he offered to hand over the men responsible for killing Elia Martell and her children. Doran probably knew that he wasn't going to get a better offer, but instead of going himself, he sent Oberyn. Of course, when Oberyn actually arrived, Tyrion was no longer acting hand, and his father Tywin was back in control. Although he honoured Tyrion's offer of a place on the small council, he had no intention of handing anyone over to Oberyn for justice. He told him that Elia and her children had all been killed by Amory Lorch, and he was now dead, so justice had been served. Oberyn was not going to accept that, though. He had 3 targets for revenge: Amory Lorch, who had indeed been killed by a bear at Harrenhal, Gregor Clegane, the Mountain, who was at the time in the Riverlands, and Tywin himself, who, despite the lack of documentary evidence, had almost certainly given the order to kill Elia and her children. So 1 down and 2 to go. We should be clear that it isn't just speculation that Oberyn came to King's Landing with the specific aim of killing Tywin Lannister. He's very open about it. Before he'd even made it inside the city gates, he says this to Tyrion: "I did not come for some mummer's show of an inquiry. I came for justice for Elia and her children, and I will have it. Starting with this lummox Gregor Clegane, but not, I think, ending there. Before he dies, the enormity that rides will tell me whence came his orders. Please assure your Lord Father of that." He smiled. "I am a bloodthirsty man, you see, and it is me you must contend with now, not my patient, prudent and gouty brother." And the threats don't stop there. "Your father," said Prince Oberyn, "may not live forever." Something about the way he said it made the hairs on the back of Tyrion's neck bristle. Suddenly he was mindful of Elia again, and all that Oberyn had said as they crossed the field of ashes. He wants the head that spoke the words, not just the hand that swung the sword. Strong words, and the Red Viper is exactly the kind of person to back up his words with actions. We should be more surprised if he hadn't tried to kill Tywin, as well as the other 2 people he held responsible, Amory Lorch and the Mountain. He took a little bit of persuading, but he did eventually seem to believe the story that Amory Lorch had been killed, mauled by a bear at Harrenhal. To be fair, it sounded like a tall story, but it was the truth. His opportunity to kill the Mountain, of course, came when Gregor Clegane returned to King's Landing to take part in the trial by combat to decide on Tyrion's fate. Oberyn quickly decided to fight for Tyrion, as it gave him the opportunity to legally kill Gregor, and despite most people's expectations, he had the best of the fight, moving quickly, finding holes in the Mountain's armour and cutting his hamstrings. The Mountain was pinned to the ground and dying. All Oberyn had to do was walk away and he would win. But instead, he went close and tried to force Gregor to admit his guilt for the murders of Elia and baby Aegon, which he did while grabbing Oberyn and killing him. As a couple of asides here, Tyrion would have been free if Oberyn hadn't been so obsessed with getting that confession from the Mountain. Oberyn may have been Tyrion's champion, but he wasn't thinking about Tyrion at all, just his own vengeance. And second, it's clear that Oberyn used poison to be sure of killing the Mountain. Oberyn wasn't just a theoretical master of poisons, he used them to kill his opponents. So Oberyn died in killing Gregor Clegane, and Amory Lorch died elsewhere. But he didn't get to kill Tywin, or did he? Oberyn would have known that he couldn't exactly kill Tywin in cold blood in King's Landing, so he had to find another way. And as we've said, Oberyn was known to be a master of poisons. Tyrion thinks about it the very first time he meets Oberyn, and we are reminded of it so many times. So the motive is there, that's undeniable. The means, also, he studied potions at the Citadel, and there was that vial of widow's tears that went missing. And finally, he had the opportunity. We're told of a private meeting between Oberyn, Tywin, and Mace Tyrell that fits the timeline. We don't see it, but could Oberyn have had the opportunity to slip something into Tywin's drink then, or on any of the other multiple times Oberyn is sitting literally next to Tywin? Definitely. So Oberyn wanted to kill Tywin, he had the skill and knowledge to do it, the poison he needed was at hand, he had the opportunity to do it, and all the evidence suggests that Tywin was indeed poisoned, which makes it feel like an open and shut case, and I think that is what happened. But just to address a challenge we noted earlier in the video, lots of people wanted Tywin dead. Why don't we suspect them? Well, we should probably just clarify who these lots of people are. I think it's fair to say that although Team Stark and Team Stannis may have wanted Tywin out of the way, neither would have stooped to poison him, and we don't get any evidence from either of their camps that such an order was even considered. Similarly, we have multiple POV chapters from Cersei, Tyrion, and others with not even a hint that they knew about it, so it's not them either. Although, and this may be absolutely nothing, but I do wonder whether Tyrion suspected that Tywin was being poisoned by Oberyn. He knew how much Oberyn wanted Tywin dead, would have noted that Widow's blood had been stolen, and crucially went to the privy with a loaded crossbow because he knew that's where his father would be. Shay hadn't said where Tywin was, Tyrion just knew. If so, Tyrion's murder of his father takes a different turn. Yes, he killed his father, but was it a mercy killing that allowed Tyrion to vent his anger? It's possible. Anyway, most other theories on who might have been poisoning Tywin centre on Varys. And it's undeniable that it was in Varys' best interests for Tywin to die. Please check out my Varys videos if you're not sure on that point. And Varys does have a track record of killing or removing competent Lannisters and others from their posts, like Kevin in the epilogue to A Dance with Dragons, for instance. But if we credit Varys with even a fraction of the intelligence and intelligence-gathering expertise that he has, he will know that Oberyn wanted to kill Tywin, so he doesn't have to. At the last, even Tyrion acknowledges that Varys must have heard Oberyn's threats to Tywin, several times in fact. If Varys had his little birds listening, Oberyn was giving them a ripe earful, Tyrion thought, and then he wants the head that spoke the words, not just the hand that swung the sword. "It is not wise to speak such treasons in the Red Keep, my prince," said Tyrion. "The little birds are listening. Let them." So if Varys wanted Tywin dead, why would he bother to get in the way of Oberyn, who wanted to do it anyway? That way the Dornish would get the blame, not him, and if Varys was poisoning Tywin, why bother giving Tyrion such clear instructions on how to get to Tywin's chambers? Because he did. 230 rungs up, the tunnel to the left, no more than 60 feet. Keep one hand on the wall as you go, you will feel the doors. The bedchamber is the third. Those are quotes. Varys basically told Tyrion how to go and kill his own father and cut all ties to the Seven Kingdoms. No, there's no reason to believe that Varys poisoned Tywin. He didn't have to. Oberyn had already done that. So, although we might think of Oberyn's revenge mission to King's Landing as a glorious failure, he actually achieved all he set out to do. Amory Lorch was already dead. He killed Gregor Clegane, even making him admit to his guilt in Elya's death, and he killed Tywin too. Tyrion shooting him was probably a mercy, actually, though no one would ever know it. Yes, Oberyn died, but he gave his life doing what he had wanted to do for nearly 2 decades. Get vengeance on the Lannisters. If you'd like to see more videos about the world of Ice and Fire, there's a link to my playlist on the left of your screen now. Or to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen. Thanks for watching. That's all for this time. I'll see you again soon.